Good evening to all, and today we have a very entertaining session with Sky joining us all the way from LA. He has kindly agreed to be with us. And what motivated us to, sort of have this panel discussion is Sky's own article that he had written about use of artificial intelligence and filmmaking. This week, we are going to have 3 separate sessions on AI on the application. We in the past have had session on AI more to understand the legalities, the risks involved, some of the tax issues, etc. Today, we will be focusing on AI in the creative industry, and down the week, we do have 2 additional sessions, use of AI in fintech and use of AI in healthcare sector. AI becomes a very, very important aspect because as you imagine, every day, new things, new applications are getting developed with the use of AI, and with that comes a new legal, tax, and business issue. Without spending much more time on this topic, I'm going to hand over straight to Sky for his presentation. But before I do that, Sky is an avid writer and also creates videos which are very educative. I've had a privilege of, noticing, having viewed some of them. He has a good combination also of being a media lawyer and also being a tax lawyer, and that's why you will see a lot of articles written by him, which is a combination of both. From an Indian perspective, most of us know Reliance had acquired DreamWorks, which is the Spielberg company in the US, and Sky was in fact, representing Reliance in that transaction. With that, over to you, Sky, with your thoughts on AI use in artificial intelligence use in the creative industry.
Thank you very much. I am practiced primarily in the film and television industry and have been watching the creep of AI in other industries and in other areas. And it has become clear to me that sooner or later, AI is going to create films. It's going to be able to actually write the stories and actually be able to do the visual presentation, to make the movie from beginning to end. And I don't think it's too far away until that happens. Right now, AI is capable of really remarkable things on the creative side. Things people thought would never happen. Things. There was always the feeling that humans had this unique ability for creativity and that AI couldn't do it. And clearly, AI has broken that barrier. It's done paintings, of course. Most famously, the painting that was sold for $450,000 at a Christie's auction. It has, if you put in a bunch of dance moves, it can create its own dance. And on YouTube, there's examples of dance created by AI. It has written stories. It has written books. There was an example where they fed in a bunch of horror stories to AI, and it managed to come up with even more scary stories on its own. The books for the what is that the TV series about the Vikings? I'm sorry, the Game of Thrones. They fed in all the books from Game of Thrones, and the AI decided the next 5 chapters would be as follows, and it basically created sequels to Game of Thrones. So you've got and it's created music. There was a famous, well-known example of a Europop music that was fed into AI, and it created its own music, and it's actually pretty good. And again, it's on YouTube, and it's not bad, including lyrics. So it's created an entire song with lyrics and music, and now it's got the dance and it's got the visual. So it's not long before you combine all of that, and you've got an AI that writes the scripts and does the films. And what's also interesting about that is that it can create actors. Like, the AI clearly has the ability, if you feed in the images, it can morph them together. And the example I talk about in the article is combining Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. We'll talk about the implications of that. But AI can do it. And so AI it can make a movie, and it's not going to be long before that happens. And at first it will be amateurish, but in time it will be really good. And it'll certainly be better than a lot of the rather shoddy movies that Hollywood makes. I mean, it is very formulaic. There are a lot of bad movies, and so AI it'll have a shot. So it's coming. It's here in the other areas, and then what that raises as a lawyer for me is a lot of interesting legal issues that AI brings in general, but in particular for the entertainment industry. And some of them are similar to the issues that come up with virtual reality, which is already here in a very big way. And like the first one that comes up, which is very interesting, is who is the author of the work? And this very similar issue has come up in a couple of contexts. Last month, there was a ruling by the United States Patent Office that held that AI could not be the creator of a patent. And because somebody had AI had come up with a new invention, they had submitted it to the patent office and said that the inventor was the AI, and the patent office said no, that's just not acceptable. Now, question: what happens to that patent? Does that mean that it's in the public domain, or what does that mean? Similarly, on the copyright side, it's critical to determine who an author is, because it depends on whether it's a work made for hire and who owns the copyright, and it's critical. And once again, you would think the Copyright Office will follow suit and say it can't be the computer, it can't be the AI. You can't submit it as AI. And then the question is, all right, so who is the author? And in a case last year, somewhat similar, a monkey took a selfie of himself, and that was submitted to the Copyright Office, and they rejected it, and therefore that picture's in the public domain. And so it's possible that the Copyright Office would say nobody's the author, and therefore it's in the public domain. I don't think that would be an acceptable resolution. So you have various choices as to who might be the author. You have whoever wrote the software for the AI. You have whoever owns the computer, if these are separate. You have whoever uploaded all the information that led to the computer being able to process the information, and then you have whoever owns the output. And so you've got actually 4 choices for who is the quote author of this work, and it's not entirely clear, who really is the author of the work. You also, what then is another interesting issue on the copyright side is that the infringement issue. And the infringement issue is the computer in all these cases in AI usually has taken elements from the underlying work and put them together. And in the music area, this is called sampling. And it's the ultimate sampling, because it can't, from everything that I can gather, the AI is taking elements that and putting them together. In the copyright context, the traditional dichotomy between infringement and non-infringement is that you are allowed to take the idea and create another work using that idea, but you're not allowed to use the expression of the original work and then use that. And again, sampling in the music industry, you're not supposed to sample the original work unless you fall within what's called fair use, which is a defense, but it's a narrow defense and not clear. For AI, it's not clear that a computer really grasps the idea of a work. It really is combining the expression, and therefore you've got the risk of infringement of all the underlying works that were uploaded. I mean, to some extent, and you're going to argue fair use. Okay, maybe, but fair use it's a challenge. If you look at in the music industry, fair use, sometimes it wins, sometimes it loses. It's up to the kind of court's discretion, and it's just not clear. Another issue that follows from this is on this: if there's infringement, who do you sue? And once again, it's the question of, do you sue whoever wrote the software, whoever owns the computer, whoever uploaded the information, or whoever owns the underlying the work that was generated, or do you sue all of them? So you've got that's going to be a really very interesting issue of by the plaintiff's bar, because there will be infringement claims. There's no question there'll be infringement claims. And then a similar issue is take the example where they create a star, which they're going to do. They're going to create their own star, so you don't have to pay them, and they'll take an amalgamation of Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, and then the question is, do either or both or neither of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt have a claim for right of publicity? If you've taken some elements of their persona and you've merged it with somebody else's, is that enough to avoid a claim? And in California, at least, there's a concept of a defense of transformative use, where if the work is transformative, that's the magic word they use. And this probably fits within being transformative. That is, there's examples where you've turned people into like half worms, and in a comic book, and that was held that was transformative. So similarly, if you're merging their personalities, you've got the issue, and their voice, because it's the same issue: voice, look, likeness, persona. And then a final issue that's fascinating for Hollywood is the whole system of the guilds, and the way the guilds work. That is, SAG, DGA, the Writers Guild, it works on the basis of exclusivity. That is, the company that signs with the guilds is agreeing that it will only use guild members and it will not use non-guild members. And the whole point of that, of course, is to give guarantee work to the guild members, so that when a studio signs with the Writers Guild, it says to the Writers Guild, I will only hire Writers Guild members. And similarly, the members of the Writers Guild, the writers themselves, commit to the union that they will only work for companies that have signed with the guilds. And it works the same with the DGA, and it works the same with SAG. What will happen with AI is that it will bypass the unions, of course, and it will, instead of using non-union humans, it will be using non-union AI, and it will clearly be bypassing the guild, and the guilds are going to get excited about this issue. And I would think right now, I don't think that it's a violation of the guild agreements right now, because although they could argue it, because the analogy will be to special effects, and they will say, look, this is no different than using a special effects. This is no different than using a typewriter to whatever. But the guilds will get excited about this, and you can expect that in future negotiations, they're going to say, look, you can't bypass us by using AI. And it'll be an interesting moment whether the studios accept that, because it's the cost benefit, and you've got a similar analogous fight going on right now with the theaters and the studios going to streaming, and the theaters getting all excited, and it's a business issue, but it's also a contractual one, because so with the guilds in particular, they have a way to defend against it by going into new agreements. So that's an overview of it, and I think it is coming, and I think it's going to be raising a whole lot of issues, including just some of those issues that I just mentioned. So that's my 2 cents.
Great. I think before I go to Mihir, let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions, since you raised quite a few interesting issues. First of all, I believe before, we all were hit by the lockdown, I understand sometime in April, there was a guild negotiation with the Writers Guild. Has that happened, or it's still in the works?
Still in the works.
As a matter of, okay, still in the works. Okay, great. The next point that you mentioned on the personality, right, of course, but do you see some element of, in some situations, a thought of passing off also being sort of invoked in the context to say that, there is a possibility of association, that the members of public are likely to associate this type of a music originating from me if you create by sampling some similar music, or in case of say Brad Pitt combination, etc., that okay, we have given our right of association with a particular product or a film or a whatever creative work. Is that a thought that can be invoked in your mind?
Do you mean do you mean like the argument trademark infringement that you're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
deemed
the context of passing off, yeah.
endorsement, yeah, deemed endorsement, so it's a trademark issue. It's a Lanham Act. Yes, yes, yeah, you could imagine that as well. I mean, you can imagine that particularly if they use trademarks or even yes, you could have a deemed endorsement if you've got somebody's persona in the film. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And when it comes to, you also mentioned that you could create a combination, of characters and all that. So in that context, do you believe that some royalties, because if there is a performer's right that is being, sort of invoked, will there be some royalties that may get kicked in, or that will not be the case because they themselves are not performing, but their, sort of transformative character is being, is performing in the films or otherwise?
Well, the opening bid by the studios is going to be nothing is owed, and then you have similar issues going on, by the way, in virtual reality, which is and you can
Right.
see this you can see and gaming. By the way, you have all these cases coming up in the United States where
That's right.
they're using people's persona, and the issue is do you have to pay them, and it's so a lot of game companies are winning in the main. So this will be an interesting issue. I mean, this is the only way that you owe them is if in fact it's an infringement of their right of publicity. So first step is you have to establish that there's been there's liability, and the way you can then solve that is by paying them.
Right. Because yeah, in fact, we were debating, in our internal training session, the very exact issue. In fact, Huzefa and I, were in fact discussing this, that there is a possibility that while you're creating this, say, an animated work, which is by AI, you're creating or, taking real life images, from the material available, and you're using, say, a particular trademark in say, a gaming app or otherwise, as say, say on McDonald's, right? Now,
Yes.
if McDonald's has, say, a tie-up with, say, a Disney for an exclusivity, how does this entire thing play out together? Because, whether McDonald's has a claim vis-a-vis the gaming app, I believe these issues are already out there. And is there, I mean, how do you perceive these issues, especially when the AI has sort of created this?
On that issue in particular, the McDonald's of the world are losing over and over and over. They keep making this claim, and they just keep losing. And they lose it in the movies, they lose it in the games. That the fact that a trademarked image, of whether it's a car or a McDonald's or whatever, appears in an audiovisual work is not enough to create to the mind of a reasonable consumer that company has sponsored or endorsed that work. And so far, they're losing over and over and over. In fact, they just lost. There was another big one they just lost in a game. But so I think that there'll be impunity on that issue. I don't think that there will be liability for the trademark. Right of publicity is a problem, and copyright is a problem, but trademarks should not be, other than famous trademarks that are used in advertising. And the way you avoid it is you just don't use the trademark in advertising, because that's the federal anti-dilution act. Yeah, so you avoid that. Yeah.
Understood. I think Sky will come back to you in a bit, but I'm going to go to Mihir now because he has done, I think PhD in artificial intelligence, and he has some thoughts to share with us. So over to you, Mihir.
Thank you, Gowree. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm so honored to be with Sky and you and Huzefa on this panel. And, technology and relationship of film is very old, right? If you think about talkies came, new technology, audio technology got integrated with visual technology. Then CinemaScope came, animatrix came, 3D photography came, then also computer animation, visual effects. So films have always been enamored and created using up and coming technology. And AI is another technology. Only different is that AI is a very, very different kind of technology. It's not only going to change the creative process, but it's also going to change the business model of the industry. And if you look at, industry is great on creativity over a long period of time, but they have used very little data to look at it as a business. Up till now, if you look at most of the movies were shown in theaters, most of the movies were broadcasted on TV. So it's only one way flow of information. Versus now, especially increased by this coronavirus, is that most of the movies are now seen through Netflix, seen through Amazon Prime and other streaming platform. The beauty of streaming platform is that it collects huge amount of data. At what time you watch what movie, at what in the movie, what time you paused, what time you gave up the movie, you abandoned the movie. All kinds of data gets collected, and that huge amount of data is going to help all the studios determine what kind of movies are preferred by companies, by people, by the target audience. So if you look at the industry structure, let's start with what they call green lighting a project or acquiring a project from a film festival. Less than 20% of films actually break even. We always hear about these large movies making billions of dollars, but less than 20% actually break even, which means there is a huge cost and risk associated with making a film and financing a film. So first aspect is predicting which film is going to make money. So there are a lot of companies. For example, there's a company which is Belgium-based called Scriptbook. What it does, it analyzes the script and tells you what level of revenue this script is going to predict, just based on script, right? Looking at historical data or all kinds of different scripts. And they claim to have 86% accuracy. Another company called Synalytic, which is working with Warner Brothers, it analyzes factors like who are the actors, what is the budget of the film, what is the brand that is used in the film, and based on that, it predicts the success of product. As a matter of fact, even academics like University Sungkyu Kwan from South Korea, they also analyze textual aspect of 42,000 scripts, and based on that, it looking into predicting success. So AI is going to help all these companies who are looking to greenlight a project to look at whether it will be a success or not. Let's look at another aspect, financing of project. The biggest question is these big studios are going to have funding and access to data and these tools. Are they going to get bigger? What will happen to all those individual or indies, right? And another problem with financing is a lot of financing is done by conservative institutions like banks. And they're always looking for some validation of financing a project. Are they going to really require these AI tools to predict revenue and finance only projects which have used this kind of tools to predict the revenue? Right? I mean, we have seen that in credit rating, right? You have credit score and the financing is used to lending individuals based on credit rating. Is that going to come into the film industry business? Look at marketing. Huge amount of money spent on marketing. Movies can spend as much as $200 million or $100 million on marketing budget. When you are marketing, there is a lot of amount of uncertainty involved. So you can create customized trailers using AI, which can be created on the fly based on the preference of a user. So it entices them to go watch a movie, right? You can also identify what are the ideal demographic. You may have thought that this is the demographic or target market for which you created a movie, but when you actually get the data as movie gets played, you can adjust your marketing tactics and strategy to move towards another market which you never thought about. There's a company called Merlin, which works with 20th Century Fox. What they do, once the movie is made, they do frame by frame analysis to look at the success of the movie. There are other companies like Vault AI, which matches the trailer's performance in the marketplace and then predicts where the success is going to be or how much money you should put into marketing budget. Pilot movies, that is also looking at, it predicts advance in 18 months in advance of film's launch, which is a huge benefit to company. So all these things are going to come. It is also going to have huge effect on revenue model. Previously we always looked at revenue coming mostly from broadcasting, right, and the box office or merchandising. Now, increasingly, we are going to see revenue coming more and more from advertisement-based, product subscription-based, product positioning-based, so that revenue model is going to change. And of course, guilds that Sky talked about. What effect this AI will have on guilds? Let's quickly look at creativity. The script, the most important aspect of any movie. You already have AI tool which automatically writes feature length script book does it. So how that is going to affect the way you write script? Of course, humans are going to play a role, but AI is going to be co-author with human in script writing. It will offer different options in a dialogue. It will offer different options in a plot line. There are various plot lines versions can also be made because now content can be created on fly using deepfakes. I'm sure you all heard about deepfakes, which has been used in film to de-age actors or reduce the age of actors. So you can have this thing created on the fly. So you can create different kind of plot lines for different kind of users. So the way you see the news is different than the way I see the news based on what kind of news I like. Same way the way you will see Sholay versus the way I will see Sholay will be different based on what I like in Sholay or movies like those. So all those on the fly plot line, on the fly content creation will come through AI. Likability score of characters will also be predicted. And based on that, you can increase the role of a character or reduce the role of a character. So all that creativity is going to come in. On cinematography, there will be various angles and settings through which film will be produced. And all those angles will be automatically used when the editing happens, depending on for different users. I talked about deepfakes, will actors ever die? We all love Amitabh Bachchan, but of course, Amitabh Bachchan is human and getting old. How can we recreate Amitabh Bachchan of Janjeer and Sholay and Diwar and Trishul again, right? Well, deepfake will allow you to do that. And there have been movies like Gemini Man, in which Will Smith has been created a separate character in parallel to his real age and the earlier age. So all of this is going to come. And one issue, last point, Gowree, I would like to mention is that where is it going to lead to the entire thing? Are we going to converge toward mediocrity? Are we going to converge towards the average in this creative process? Are we going to use the loss of, are we going to see the loss of diversity, self-plagiarism, more of the same, or rise of sequel and prequel, more and more of those? Are we going to see loss of human unpredictability, serendipity, or happy accidents that happen in movie making? Another issue which really concerns me is the perpetuating biases and stereotype, because AI is created based on historical data. And movies, are they going to perpetuate bias towards women, towards gender, towards race, towards sexual preferences, towards ethnic background? If those biases get perpetuated because those are the only script and those are the only characters which are approved by AI, is it going to really create, take us to a different level? And how AI is going to predict cultural shift, change in the taste, because it's mostly based on history. So all of these issues are very interesting, but like any other technology that movie industry has used or adopted in the past, AI will be adopted in the past, and it's going to change the business model as well as the process of creativity And that's my view on it, Gowree.
Wow, that the last few comments that you made are very, very interesting. And let me see if Sky has any thoughts on the points that Mihir made.
No, I thought very, very interesting. No additional thoughts.
Sure. So while I'm moving to Huzefa to address some of the issues that Sky raised from a US law perspective, let us see how they play out in the Indian scheme of things. In the meantime, Mihir, there are some questions for you in the chat box. So why don't you look at them, and maybe at the end of the session we will take those. And
Absolutely.
I will now move on to Huzefa on a couple of points that Sky mentioned from a US law perspective, especially the authorship and ownership of from a copyright law. Could you throw some light on how we look at it from Indian law perspective?
Absolutely, right. So I think at the outset, Sky and Mihir, thank you for setting the right tone and specifically the perspective. I think Sky, you mentioned that in a normal scenario, when an output is related to a AI or it's a computer generated output, there could be essentially 4 to 5 authors, which is actually quite true. And with technology evolving, this list can probably only increase. More interestingly, from an Indian law perspective and specifically from a media entertainment perspective, how does it actually play out under the Indian Copyright Act? So the Indian Copyright Act specifically goes and identifies, literary, dramatic, or artistic works which is computer generated. The author will be the person who causes the work to be created. Now, who is the person who causes the work to be created is something which is gray, which will obviously evolve with the passage of time and with jurisprudence evolving. So as Sky briefly mentioned, is it the person who is actually owning the software? Is it the person who is actually feeding the data? Is it the person who's commissioning the work? Or is it somebody else who is kind of doing some joint development or R&D? And the reason why the concept of an author is so critical from an Indian law perspective and specifically from a film industry perspective is because whenever there is a literary or a musical work involved in a cinematography film, the author has the right to receive royalties when the cinematography film is exploited beyond the purview of a physical cinema hall. Now, this is extremely interesting, right? Because, with the passage of times and, with things getting more and more digital, cinema halls probably may not be the go-to medium. With OTT coming in right now, specifically in the testing times we are, right? Cinema halls are, history, which is where the concept of author becomes very important, because in these sort of situations, the author will have the right to receive royalty irrespective of the production house actually owning the copyright. And more importantly, this right cannot be waived. And there can be very co-author situations also, considering the example which Kai mentioned. So this is one very interesting nuance specifically from an Indian copyright perspective. And I'll quickly go on to the second one, right? Sky briefly mentioned that how do you attribute liability? Specifically, when it comes to copyright infringement from an Indian law perspective, there are broadly 4 remedies which are available. I'll probably just simplify it and divide it from a civil and criminal perspective. The civil remedies typically which are available from a copyright perspective are damages. Second is injunction, and the third is sale proceeds. When it comes to infringement of particular works, and of course the penal functions are related more to imprisonment. Now, the underlying premise to attract damages or any penal provisions is the entire concept of knowledge. To the extent the defendant can prove that at the time the infringement was happening, he or she or the production house was not aware, basically had no knowledge, and had no reasonable ground to believe that there was a copyright infringement or there was a copyright subsisting in the work, then damages cannot be claimed. This gets extremely interesting when it comes to the AI world, right? And specifically when the machine is going live and when it's talking to each other, how do you actually attribute knowledge towards the producer? How would the producer actually know that the work which is being commissioned or the work which is being caused to be created by the AI has a certain knowledge or doesn't have a certain knowledge. And there are a few practical do's and don'ts. I think, Gowree will be covering it specifically from a contractual perspective. How do you mitigate liability, specifically from a civil and criminal remedy perspective? So, these are the few interesting points which specifically come up, in the M&E industry and more relevant to cinematography films. Thought of sharing the same. Over to you, Gowree.
Thanks, Huzefa. I think I want to, sort of ask a couple of questions to both Sky and Mihir in the context of intention or knowledge, right? When in the AI scheme of things, as we know, AI is simply, working on the existing data or past data and applying it further, in terms of the instructions given to AI. Now, when it comes to, so the first question is to Mihir, and then I'll move on to Sky, in terms of if at all there is a trial, then what happens, right? But Mihir, first to you, that
Sure.
when you say, and this becomes very relevant for us from an understanding of technology perspective, the example that Sky gave that, a script will be written. So how will an AI actually function? Can we just first understand that whether I'm required to give, say, 10 different stories, or probably, as Sky said, okay, Game of Thrones, the initial part, then they are creating something, or will I simply say this is the idea, because an expression is more important than an idea from a copyright law. I will give an idea to AI and let the AI be, left open to the public domain or whatever, and then gather the material and create something. So can we just first look at this, and then I'm going to ask Sky about, the trial related issue per se. Yeah, over.
So first, let's look at the technical aspect of it, and then I'll give you the impact on that on the process and the legal issue. Technically, what happens that AI has to be taught, right? So you look at all the historical data. So you look at all the different examples of scripts. It goes through every word in the script. And then it also can look at, AI can look at what part of the script has worked between in a different kind of scenario. So it can identify the context in which this dialogue was used versus the other dialogue was used, right? And Sky has raised a very interesting point about expression versus idea. Expression is something copying exactly same dialogue. But idea is you take that context and apply that context and that idea as opposed to actual expression of the dialogue, right? So AI, in my view, is not going to do expression copying because it knows there are rules for plagiarism. There are rules that are very well defined. So AI is going to focus more, if it has to be successful and accepted, it is going to focus more on the ideas. And what it is going to do, it look at different scripts and look at what had become successful between a husband and wife dialogue in a certain situation of sensitive issues about, adultery, for example. Right. So it will look at all those different dialogue, and whatever the author has put in, it may even suggest 5 different versions of it, right? Which may create its own different expression. But idea is still what has become successful, right? So, and we human also do that. We learn from other. I watch Sky giving his talk, and I learn from him, and I adopt what I think is great way to present something, right? So I also do that. Is it plagiarism? Well, to some extent, you can call it. It's an idea, right? Except I copy exact the same words that Sky has used. So AI is not going to copy expression for sure. Humans do that. It's called plagiarism. But AI is going to take all these concepts and offer multiple options of that based on its learning model that it has developed. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so if ultimately we believe that there is no possibility of infringement per se, but there is some adaptation, some not adaptation in the way we use the copyright law, but overall, from an existing material, you are creating something new, and maybe you are able to get out of infringement claim. But if at all there is something that gets created, and it's not uncommon that two writers, simultaneously are creating something, right? Which is similar. Even in expression, it is not uncommon, and we handle these cases day in and day out. So in that scheme of things, if one were to go back and check what did AI look out for, right? Then, from a trial perspective, Sky, I mean, how do you believe the entire, evidence will work? Will there be like an audit or an, expert audit that will have to be conducted as to demonstrate that there was no reliance on an existing copyrighted work, but what AI has created happens to be similar to what is in, already in existence?
So several comments. Comment one is, let's look at the idea expression dichotomy, which is the classic way that it's expressed. It troubles me to say that a AI has an idea. I hear, okay, I'm worried that we're going to fall in love with it, or I mean, it's what that concerns me. All right, so but I hear the gentleman's his point is correct. I'm concerned about the concept of that an AI has an idea. Second comment, which I think resolves this, is that the truth in the United States, at least, is that there is no idea expression dichotomy, and that there is no, in fact, there is no clear line for what a derivative work is or isn't. And that what the truth is that it's just absolutely up to the jury or judge's feeling of what is fair or not fair. And I when I teach this in my classes, I just throw out a bunch of examples and I ask the class, do you think it's infringement? And so when I get more than half the class raises their hand and says it's infringement, I say, okay, here's what you write in your opinion. You say the following. You say that this is based on the original, and you say that it is copying the expression. And in your opinion, you just write that. And then if you go the other way, okay, and if you say it's not infringement, then here's what you write. You write, it was only the idea, and it's not based, right? And it's only based upon, it's not based on the original. And so it's labels. The truth is, these are labels that are placed ad hoc after the fact. And that what's really happening is people are ruling with their hearts, and then they're rationalizing it later. That's without question, that's what's happening. So if you look at any AI generated work, what should happen is that unless it really is copying, it should be not infringement, because whatever you call it, however we'll call it idea, that it is original. The whole basis for AI is that it's original, and so it shouldn't be infringement. But courts will struggle because of these wordings. They will struggle with the concept that AI has an idea. So I think that's it'll be interesting how the opinions come out.
That's a very, very interesting point, because ultimately, as you rightly said, if you sort of hold your hand to your heart, whether there is an unfair use or not, because yes, there is a idea and expression dichotomy, and we can keep arguing, but that there has been an access. Yeah. In the absence of access, of course, one can sort of develop a very good case. But when there has been an access, and thereafter what happens, right? Yeah. So I think that is where ultimately, and in the US you do have a jury system. In India we don't. So so then it's how the judge ultimately looks at it.
Yeah. And just one point, Gowree, I think just to tie up this whole thing, right? I think where it will actually get even more interesting, and actually that ties on to one of the questions. Assuming that the AI has created something which is not infringing, right? AI essentially, as of now, doesn't have statehood except Sophia and Saudi Arabia. So even in a situation where something is created for a purpose for which the AI was not made for, so the person who has created the software made it for a script, but ultimately the AI made a musical note, and that actually turned out to be an infringement. And it is a proven infringement. It's clear, as Sky said, that the students can actually say, yes, this is an infringement. In those situations, if you need to attribute liability, the question is, who do you attribute the liability to? Because the
think the point that he was making, where do you really attribute the liability? And, there is a concept of contributory liability, and we will need to, sort of examine whether those principles will apply here. And when I say liability under, any law, there are two types of issues that arise. One is a simpliciter injunction point, where there will be an injunction if there is an infringement proved, right? The question really will be of damages in the case of civil liability. And under Indian law, as we said earlier, there is a criminal liability as well. And there the question will be that, okay, who is criminally liable? Because there the question of intention, etc. comes up. So I think that also brings me to another question, which I think, Kai, I think you may have briefly touched upon in your article as well. Apart from the copyright issues, there are other issues that are likely to come in. For example, defamation, slander. In the Indian context, unfortunately, or there could be some other issues such as, which we are faced on a regular basis. Obscenity issues, or you do have, morality issues, and some of the provisions, under the Indian law, where, so just to take a step back, under Indian law, freedom of speech and expression is not absolute. Under Constitution, we do have provisions under which, for certain, sort of headings, such as security of the state, sovereignty, friendly relationships with the countries, as I said, morality, decency, defamation, all these become grounds to curtail the freedom of speech and expression. However, not only that, but under Indian law, there are criminal sanctions attached to it. Even defamation under Indian law has a criminal sanction. Other than that, as I said, religious sentiments. Now, the point that you made, Mihir, on bias, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if there are stories that are, sort of out there, because of which a story that gets created, and in India, we do have these issues constantly being, coming up, that why a particular community constantly being depicted in a particular manner. We have had cases actually going to court to that extent, mm-hmm. right? And in some cases, there could be criminal liability. Then the question really arises is, where do you attribute that liability? How do you prove intention? So, Sky, do you have any thoughts on that as to when it is AI-based, where will you pin down, the intention aspect, in relation to the creation of a particular aspect, in the feature, which has been objected to? Or is it for...
If I was going to guess in the U.S., I think they're going to pin liability on whoever owns the resulting work, just because they're going to have to tag somebody, and they're going to say, "Look, you had the choice to either not exhibit it or to exhibit it." Exactly. And I don't think that they will go back to the earlier, to the programmer and whoever uploaded. I think, but it's not clear.
One more thing I would add is that some of the content will be auto-generated, like, the recommendation we get for the books that we watch, or recommendation we get for the videos we watch on YouTube. Some of the content will be auto-generated. How do you deal with that auto-generated content, right? Where you don't have really control of what exactly the content is going to be. That is also going to, and that leads me to 2 points that I want to throw out to all of you experts in legal area. Do we really need a new law to look into, AI-based discrimination? Right? Human doing discrimination is very different than AI doing discrimination. Do we have to have a new law? And on the other side, should we think about some kind of limited liability provision for the decision maker or the user or the owner of the AI? Right? We have used limited liability for corporation, even for board members, right? In a corporation. So do we need a new law to have a limited liability for decision maker who use AI? I would love to get your views on that.
Sure. So I think, on the, on this particular aspect, and I'm going to take, Sky's example forward. Like, I'll give you an example that suppose now, the platforms create, the content for the world, right? So if they are sort of creating content for the world, there is a possibility that AI has gone out there and, sort of looked into the material and created certain, content. Coming to the Indian context again, now whether that particular content will create any religious consequence in India is not something, the platform owner or otherwise may necessarily know. There is no intention. However, the question will arise, as Sky rightly said, was there a sort of an requirement to not rely on AI, but do one level of further audit to say that, okay, is this something, because when you're appointing writers, when you're sort of creating something from the local scheme of things, you get a different flavor or input, which may not be necessarily given when you are in an AI scheme of things, right? So would there be, additional level of due diligence required before you actually exploit the work or engage, that work further to ensure that you are, generally sort of kosher when it complies to content-related laws, right? Will there be an additional sort of step expected of a due diligence, right? So I think that also deals with your answer partially, that can we just leave it to AI and just raise our hand, or do we need to, impugn a certain liability, okay, basis ownership, if it ultimately comes to that, right? So I know that I've not answered your question fully, but I'm just trying to connect the 2 points that both of you have made. I think there are a couple of questions that I can see on the screen. So would you want to take, Mihir, a couple of them, because we are almost close to time, and then a couple of questions. Sky, I can see a couple of questions for you as well. If you can just look at the question and answer box that is out there on the on the screen. Yeah, over to you, Mihir.
Sky, okay. Yeah, one question is that, how does AI does this kind of performance of deepfakes, right? What it basically looks at visual features of an actor. So it looks at the eyes and the color of eye and the color of hair and all the feature of the face. And it mimics that in computer graphics. And then also looks at the style of talking, style of gestures that people have liked of an actor. So if you look at Amitabh Bachchan, we all loved his hair, right? We all loved his eyes. And I still love it. It's amazing, very penetrating and convincing, goes straight to your heart. And his style of talking, his style of pausing, all of those can be easily, human copy that. You have this comedy artist who copy that. Same way AI can copy it, but it can copy much better because it's impartial. It doesn't have other biases built into it. So it looks at all those film of Amitabh Bachchan, and then it copies that, and then you have computer graphics which comes into play, and then you have AR VR technology also coming into play, which allows you to do interactive analysis with this. So it is all computer generated, which will come through based on all different features and of the actor and his delivery method.
Thank you, Mihir. Sky, did you see that question, or do you want me to point it out to you?
Yes, which one in particular?
If you can check the last one first, in the US, developing law to address AI, originality, etc. That one.
Yeah, the answer to that one is yes, we're very slow, and it's going to be resolved. And what will happen is there will be before there's legislation, there will be litigation. And there will be lots of litigation, and when there becomes too much litigation, then the legislation will try to step in to sort it out. So we've got a ways to go with these issues. And I see some of the earlier questions are similar to what we've asked, like what is the line between infringement and non-infringement? And the answer is, I think that you'll rule with your heart, and then the question is it too close or is it not? And then the next question was, have there been any cases that have particularly dealt with the creation of works by AI? And I would say there was this recent very important patent decision that held that AI could not be the creator of a patent. and which then threw it up in the air as to whether that patent then is patentable at all. So that's the only case I'm aware of, because this is also new. Yeah.
I think, Sky, that's a very interesting question, right? If you just happen to own AI, does that mean whatever AI creates, you own it? It's going to be a huge challenge there, right? Because everything AI creates goes into public domain, then AI obviously is not going to flourish. Think about, if everything, all kind of drug that produced by AI and used by pharma companies in drug manufacturing, if it all goes into AI, pharma companies will have very little incentive. If it goes into public domain, they will have very little incentive to use AI or benefit from AI. So I think there will be somewhere in between, and that's where I thought about some kind of little bit liability on the ownership aspect, which allows you to monetize it at the same time. I don't think the patent would hold on AI. I think I totally agree with you on that, Sky.
Okay, great. Huzefa, are you back? Do you want to make any quick comments on what we discussed? Otherwise, we are almost at the end of the session.
My 2 cents to conclude is, tying up what Sky and Mihir said, right? I think there are two separate issues which kind of converge. If you want to protect AI creations and simultaneously try and hold it accountable, what do you do? One is, there is a lot of jurisprudence and theology in terms of granting a hybrid statehood to AI, which is one theory. And the second one, from an accountability perspective, essentially there will be three legs, right, which are applicable. One is the creator of the AI. Second, while the AI is functioning, the person or the entity supervising that function. And the third, the entity which is owning the output of the AI. Now, depending on attribution of liability principles, how will all these three be jointly liable, partially liable? And if simultaneously statehood is given, then all of this would change, even from an ownership perspective. So I think it will all need to be looked at holistically. These are my closing thoughts. Over to you, Gowree.
Thank you. Thank you, Sky. Thanks for joining us, today. And thanks, Mihir, also joining us from our Palo Alto office. I can see Nishith is here. So do you want to have some, quick comments? I'm sure, Sky, yeah.
From the word go right to the beginning. Wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Sky, for coming on board, and Mihir, excellent job, and of course, Gowree, Huzefa, thank you so much. But Sky, very nice of you. I think we should have some more programs like this, because I think these are so esoteric issues and we have so much of intellectual contribution to make. I think you're really wonderful, and the landscape you provided was very useful, and it's going to help us shape the things in the future here as well. And the same way I should talk about Mihir. I think your PhD in artificial intelligence and sitting in our Silicon Valley office, I know all these kind of esoteric things you really have mastered now with your. So it's very important for us to understand how the mechanics of the AI work, and then we can decide on legal consequences. Because you don't understand technology, I think you just start talking superfluous. So I think together with Sky, you and both of you have done a wonderful job. And of course, Huzefa and Gowree, thank you so much for making it really great cCep today. And I think let's do something more interesting in the coming weeks. Sky, I hope you'll be able to
Thank you. And Sky, we will request you one more time to discuss interesting tax issues, maybe some other time. But thank you very much for joining us. And have a great day. Have a great day, Mihir, you too.
Thank you,
and
Gowree.
thank you so much.